The moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. It was like plunging into deep water, thicker, colder, pressing against their skin with an invisible weight. The wooden floor groaned beneath their feet, exhaling dust as if the house had been holding its breath for years. Bryce was the first to speak. "Creepy as hell." Jason let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow in the vast silence of the Winchester house. The place was a maze of twisting corridors and staircases leading nowhere, designed to confuse spirits or trap them. Jenna clicked on her flashlight, the beam slicing through the stale air. "So, where do we start?" "Probably with that," Olivia said, pointing. A single sheet of aged paper was nailed to the wall. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, as if written in desperation. The edges of the paper were curled and darkened, as though it had been burned but refused to disintegrate. 9 rules to survive the night at the Winchester house. 1. Do not call each other by name inside the house. 2. You will feel cold breath on your neck at some point. Do not react. 3. If you hear whispering from inside the walls, ignore them. 4. There will be a locked box in the living room. Do not open it. 5. If a room has no windows, do not go inside. It is a trap. 6. If you hear children laughing, cover your ears. They're not laughing, they're screaming. 7. The house will try to convince you that one of your friends never existed. Do not believe it. 8. There will be a locked door with scratches on it. You will want to open it. You must not. 9. When leaving, count your group. If there is an extra person, do not let them follow you outside. Bryce snorted. Classic haunted house gimmick. He ripped the letter off the wall with one sharp tug. The paper felt strangely wet in his hands. Frowning, he dropped it. It landed face up, the ink bleeding across the page, shifting like veins crawling beneath skin. Then the front door slammed shut behind them. The sound crashed through the house like a cannon blast, shaking the floorboards beneath their feet. Olivia whipped around, yanking at the brass handle. Locked. No give. Jason forced a chuckle. "Okay, so haunted house prank?" Jenna wasn't laughing. "Who shut the door?" Silence. Bryce tried to play it cool. "Wind?" "There was no wind," Olivia whispered. A long, slow creak echoed from the second floor. A shadow shifted at the top of the grand staircase, something watching. The air in the house seemed to pull tighter, like the walls themselves were breathing them in. Then the temperature dropped. They felt it at the same time. The pressure of something unseen pressing against their skin, brushing past them. Something was welcoming them in, and it wasn't going to let them leave. The house was waiting. Jason exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, look, I know this place is supposed to be weird, but—" "Guys!" Olivia's voice was tight. "Did you hear that?" Silence stretched between them. The dust in the air swirled as if disturbed by something unseen. Bryce forced a grin, stepping ahead. "Come on, we came here to see some ghosts, right? So let's—" "Jason?" The group froze. Jason turned, his brow furrowed. "What?" Olivia's face drained of color. "I didn't say your name." Jason stared at her. "Yeah, you did. You literally just—" The lights flickered. A long, shuddering breath exhaled right behind them, a sound like something vast and hollow filling its lungs for the first time, the kind of breath that shouldn't come from anything human. No one dared turn around. Bryce swallowed hard. Maybe it's just a click. The hallway light bulb popped, plunging them into semi-darkness. The only light came from Jenna's flashlight, shaking slightly in her grip. "Don't move," Olivia whispered. A faint shuffle sounded right at Jason's back. His breath hitched. He felt it now. The air was different, thick, humid. Something was behind him, standing so close he could feel a presence, a mass of air displaced by something that shouldn't be there. A voice, raspy and wet, echoed right into his ear. "Jason," it whispered softly. The flashlight flickered. Jason bolted. His body acted before his mind could catch up. He ran, stumbling down the hall, pushing blindly into darkness. The others shouted his name, but he didn't stop. The moment he turned a corner, the house changed. The hallway he expected to see wasn't there. Instead, an endless corridor stretched before him. The walls narrowed, the ceiling lowered. He felt it bending around him, shifting, enclosing. The house was trying to swallow him. "Guys." His voice was barely a whisper. Somewhere behind him something dragged itself forward, Slow, measured. Jason turned his head slightly, heart hammering against his ribs. A shadow loomed at the end of the hall. Its body was wrong, too tall, limbs slightly out of sync with gravity. It tilted its head as if studying him. Then it moved, not walking, gliding. Jason turned and ran. The others were still at the junction where he had left them, their faces pale in the dim light. Bryce grabbed him. What the hell happened? Jason's chest rose and fell rapidly. He tried to speak. He couldn't. Behind him, the hallway was normal again, but something in the shadows was still watching. Jason couldn't stop shaking. His pulse hammered in his ears, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The others stood in a tight circle, watching him with wary eyes. "I swear to God," he whispered. Something was there." Bryce forced a laugh. "Dude, you scared yourself running like that." Jason shook his head violently. "No, the hall changed. It wasn't normal. And something followed me." No one responded. A faint creak echoed from the ceiling above them. Slow, deliberate. "Okay, fine," Jenna muttered. "Let's just keep moving." They walked in silence, the dim light from their flashlights barely keeping the darkness at bay. The house pressed in around them, the air growing heavier with each step. It smelled of rot and dust, of something left too long in the dark. The corridor stretched ahead, its edges warping slightly, as if the house was subtly shifting while they weren't looking. Then it happened. A breath. Cold, wet, and too close. Jason stiffened. Then Olivia. Then Jenna. One by one, they all felt it. A presence just behind them, exhaling against their skin. Bryce swallowed. "Don't." Then Jason shuddered. He didn't mean to. The icy breath slithered down his spine, a deep, primal reaction making his body recoil before his mind could catch up. The moment he moved, something whispered his name. "Jason." A rasping, elongated hiss, as if something had been waiting, just waiting for him to break the rule. Jenna clamped a hand over his mouth. No one dared to breathe. The flashlight beams trembled as the darkness around them thickened. The cold presence behind them was no longer just breath. It was mass. Something was standing there, watching. The wooden floor creaked under a shifting weight. Jason's pulse pounded in his skull. He had to move. He had to. Olivia grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. No one turned around. They stood, frozen, while the thing behind them sighed. The air around them stirred, shifting slightly like a current passing through water. Then it moved. A faint shuffling, something dragging across the floor, but away from them. Seconds stretched into eternity before the pressure lifted. The cold receded. The air grew normal again. Jenna let out a shaking breath. "You moved," she whispered. Jason swallowed hard. "I know." Bryce's voice was barely audible. "What if it comes back?" From the hallway ahead, the walls began to whisper. The hallway ahead pulsed with something wrong. At first, the whispers were faint, like the wind slipping through cracks in the old house. But as they walked forward, the voices grew. Soft, overlapping murmurs swirled around them, slithering along the walls like unseen fingers brushing over old wallpaper. Jenna hesitated. "Do you hear?" "Shh," Olivia hissed. They stopped. The whispers shifted, no longer meaningless murmurs. They pleaded. "Help us." The words crawled from the walls, thin and desperate. Dozens of voices layered on top of each other, overlapping in a chorus of agony. Jason's stomach twisted. "We should go." But Bryce stepped closer. "Wait, what if it's—" The wallpaper bulged. Bryce yelped and jumped back as something pressed from the other side. A human outline, thin hands clawing against the paper, a face pressing forward, stretching the fabric of reality itself. Jenna gagged. "Oh, God." The whispers turned to moans. Bryce stumbled backward as the walls rippled, more faces emerging. Hands, fingers, something writhing beneath the wallpaper. Then Jason noticed Olivia. She was staring at one of the walls, her face pale. "Olivia?" She took a slow step forward. The wallpaper near her trembled, as if something inside was breathing. Jason grabbed her wrist. "Don't listen to it." But Olivia didn't move. Her lips parted slightly and she whispered, "Mom." Jason's blood ran ice cold. "Olivia, no." But her fingers lifted toward the wall. A rotten hand burst through. It latched onto her throat, nails jagged and yellow, skin sloughing away in wet chunks. Olivia choked, eyes going wide as the thing in the wall pulled. Jason grabbed her other arm, yanking hard. Jenna screamed. Bryce tore at the arm. The thing's grip was inhumanly strong. The whispering grew frantic. Let her go. Let her go. Let her go. Jason yanked harder. A sickening snap, and the thing in the wall shrieked. The hand recoiled, vanishing back into the bulging wallpaper. Olivia fell forward, gasping for breath. The hallway lurched, twisting. The faces in the walls withered, sinking back into the wallpaper. The whispers faded to nothing. Jenna hauled Olivia up. Are you okay? Olivia was shaking. She touched her throat where red welts were forming. It sounded like her, she whispered. Bryce grabbed Jason's arm. We need to get the hell out of here. But then Jason saw it. A rusted box sat on a table ahead, and the chains around it were moving. The box sat in the center of the room, wrapped in rusted chains that clanked softly against its sides, as if something inside was moving. None of them spoke. Jason felt it first, a pull, not physical but something deeper, a whisper at the edge of his mind, a feeling like the box wanted them to come closer. I don't like this, Jenna muttered. Bryce exhaled sharply. You think? Olivia, still rubbing the raw red marks on her throat, stared at the box. What's inside? Jason took a slow step forward. The closer he got, the more he could feel it, a thrum in the air like a heartbeat. He reached out, his fingers barely an inch from the chains when the house groaned. A deep, stomach-churning sound like wood stretching, bones popping. Jason yanked his hand back. Then the ceiling above them split open. A mouth, not a hole, not a crack. A gaping, grinning mouth stretched across the ceiling beams, rows of teeth jagged and splintered like broken glass. Jenna screamed. Bryce stumbled backward. Jason grabbed Olivia's wrist and ran. The mouth in the ceiling widened, curling into something that almost resembled a smile. The chains on the box snapped. The lid lurched upward. Jason didn't look back. They sprinted through the doorway as the room behind them collapsed inward, a wet, slithering sound filling the air. The door slammed shut on its own. They stood there, gasping for breath, backs pressed against the wall. The rules, Jenna whispered. Do not open the box. Bryce turned his head slightly. It opened itself. Jason swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. He couldn't get the image out of his head, the ceiling stretching like muscle, the grinning maw lurking above them. Something was in this house, something alive. He turned to Olivia. What did you see? She shook her head, voice barely a whisper. I don't know, but I think whatever was inside the box, it's loose now. A sharp knock echoed from behind the door they had just escaped through. Once, twice, 3 times. A slow, rhythmic tapping, then silence. They didn't wait around. Jason turned, scanning the dim corridor ahead. They needed to get out. But then they saw it. A door slightly ajar. Beyond it, only darkness, and a whisper in Jason's mind. Come in. The door stood slightly open. Beyond it there was nothing. No light, no furniture, no shape or depth. Just a void of endless black. Jason felt his stomach twist. He knew what the rules said. Do not enter the windowless room. Jenna grabbed his arm. We are not going in there. But before anyone could move, Jenna screamed. A force yanked her forward, hard, her feet dragging across the floor. Jason lunged, grabbing her wrist just as she was pulled inside. The door slammed shut. A high-pitched scream erupted from inside. Jenna! Olivia pounded on the door. Jenna, can you hear me? Her screams were warping. Jason's heart pounded. He pressed his ear against the wood. The screaming twisted into something else. Not human, not right. Something inside the room was changing her. A grotesque, choking gurgle echoed from the other side, a wet rip, a sound like flesh unraveling. Get the door open, Bryce shouted. Jason threw his weight against it. The wood was cold to the touch, unnaturally cold. His skin felt numb where he touched it. Then silence. No more screams, only the sound of breathing, slow, deep, not Jenna's. Jason backed away. His entire body screamed at him to run. Jenna? Olivia whispered. The breathing on the other side stopped. Then, knuckles rapped against the door. Soft, deliberate. Bryce clenched his fists. That's not her. The doorknob twisted. Jason stepped back. The door was opening. Run! The 3 of them bolted down the hallway. Behind them, the door creaked open, and something stepped out. They didn't turn around, didn't want to see what had left that room in Jenna's place. Jason barely saw where they were going, only that the hallway seemed endless. Then, abruptly, the sound of laughter. Children's laughter. Not playful, mocking, twisting in the air like something rotten. Jason felt something warm trickle down from his nose. He wiped at it. Blood. The laughter grew louder, more distorted, more wrong. Olivia pressed her hands over her ears. "Stop, please, stop." Jason turned a corner and ran straight into something cold. His breath caught. There were figures standing at the end of the hall, small, childlike. But their mouths were wrong. They weren't laughing, they were screaming. Jason froze. The children stood at the end of the hallway, their faces half hidden in shadows. There were 3 of them. At first glance, they looked normal, small, still, silent. But then he saw their mouths, stretched too wide. Their lips curled unnaturally, as if pulled by invisible hooks at the corners. Their bodies were rigid, their hands hanging limp and lifeless at their sides. But the laughter continued. It wasn't coming from their mouths. The sound poured from their throats, a high-pitched, twisting noise like something was playing their voices on a broken record. Bryce took a step back. What the hell are they? The laughter warped. Jason's nose started bleeding again, more this time. A sudden searing pressure drilled into his skull, as if the sound itself was digging inside his brain. The hallway tilted. Jason staggered, his vision darkening at the edges. The children's eyes snapped to him. Not normal eyes, not human, too black, too deep, like pits dug straight into their skulls, and they were watching him. Jason's knees buckled. The sound was in his head, crawling inside, sinking deep. "Stop," Olivia whimpered, pressing her hands to her ears. "Please, stop." The children tilted their heads. Their laughter grew louder. Jason felt something warm trickle from his ears. Bryce grabbed his arm. "Move, now." Jason stumbled forward, dragging Olivia with him. The children didn't move, they just watched. As they ran past, Jason risked one last glance, and the children's mouths split open, not wide, endless. Darkness spilled from their throats, pouring onto the floor like ink. Jason didn't stop, didn't breathe. They ran, twisting through corridors, not knowing where they were going, only that they had to get away. Finally, the laughter faded. Jason collapsed against a wall, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He wiped his nose. His fingers came away sticky with blood. Bryce bent over, hands on his knees. "What the hell was that?" Jason couldn't answer. Jason checked his phone with shaking hands. Their last photo together. Jenna was in it. But as he watched, she faded, like she had never existed. Jason's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the screen, fingers tightening around his phone. The image was the same as before, them standing in front of the Winchester house. But as he watched, Jenna's figure flickered, her outline blurred, like ink bleeding across wet paper. Her face melted into the background, her limbs dissolving into the shadows. Then, gone. The photo now showed only 3. Jason's stomach turned. "No, no, no." He tapped the screen, scrolling frantically through his gallery. Every picture. Jenna was missing from all of them. Bryce snatched the phone from his hand. "What the hell are you freaking out about?" Jason looked up, chilled to the bone. "Jenna, she's—" Bryce's face twisted in confusion. "Who?" Jason blinked. "Jenna," he said again, slower. Bryce's expression didn't change. "Dude, I don't know who you're talking about." Jason turned to Olivia. She looked pale, shaking slightly, but she wasn't panicking. She wasn't reacting. "Jenna," Jason repeated, his voice rising. "She was with us. She—" Olivia frowned. "Jason, we came here with 3 people. His heart lurched. "No," he whispered. "No, there were 4 of us." Bryce shook his head. "Are you messing with us?" Jason's hand shook. His brain felt wrong, like something was rewiring his thoughts, reconfiguring reality. A deep, gnawing terror bloomed inside his chest. They didn't remember her. She had been here. She had screamed. She had been pulled into that room, and now she was just erased. Jason squeezed his eyes shut, forcing memories to the surface. Jenna laughing on the drive here, Jenna rolling her eyes at Bryce's jokes, Jenna being dragged into the windowless room. The moment the thought hit him, his head throbbed. A cold voice slithered through his mind. "Forget." Jason clutched his skull. No. but something was pulling at his memories, unraveling them, twisting them until he didn't know what was real. Jason opened his mouth to fight it. And then he wasn't sure anymore. A flicker of doubt crawled through his mind. Had there really been 4 of them? A deep, sharp knock sounded at the end of the hallway. They all turned. A door covered in deep scratches stood there, rattling slightly. A voice, faint, fragile, called from behind it. "Guys, please, I'm still in here." Jason's blood froze. It was Jenna's voice. The door rattled. The scratches covering its surface looked deep, too deep, like something had clawed at it for years, desperate to get out. Jason couldn't breathe. The voice from the other side was Jenna's. "Guys," it was soft, weak. "Please, I'm still in here." Jason stepped forward. Bryce grabbed his arm. "Don't." Jason yanked free. "She's in there." Bryce shook his head. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "We don't know that." Jason's chest tightened. The memories, Jenna fading from the photos, the others forgetting she existed. If the house had erased her, how could she be calling out to them now? His hand hovered over the doorknob. It was ice cold. "Jason," Olivia whispered, barely audible. "Think." Behind the door, Jenna's voice trembled. "Please, I don't know where I am. It's dark. I don't know what's happening." Jason clenched his teeth. It sounded so real. Then the voice broke. I don't want to be alone in here. Please, Jason. Please." His hand closed around the knob. The house sighed. The scratches on the door deepened. The wood groaned, the entire frame seeming to lean toward him like it was waiting. Then, a sound, a subtle, wet click, like something adjusting its jaw. Jason's stomach twisted. He took a step back. The voice changed. The tremble vanished. The softness dissolved. Then it said, too calm, too steady, "You almost opened it." Jason staggered back. Bryce grabbed him, pulling him away. "Move!" The door lurched. The wood cracked, splitting like something inside was trying to force its way out. A low, wet chuckle seeped through the cracks. Jason ran. The 3 of them bolted down the corridor, not stopping, not looking back. Behind them, the scratched door shuddered violently. The groaning deepened, turning into a sound that did not belong in this world. Then, silence. Jason's chest heaved. His entire body shook. That wasn't Jenna. The house had almost tricked him. But there in front of them in the distance was the front door of the house. Bryce's breath came fast. "We're leaving. Now." Olivia nodded. They ran toward the exit, the house groaning around them, shifting, closing in. Finally, they burst through the front door. They made it. Jason gasped for air. Then Olivia whispered, "Wait, count us." They turned. There were 4 of them. Jason's breath caught in his throat. 4. They had been 3 when they ran. Now there were 4. His skin crawled. The extra person stood slightly apart from the group, head tilted downward, their face obscured by shadows. Their breath came slow, steady, too steady. Bryce's voice was barely a whisper. Who is that?" Olivia started shaking her head slowly. No, we left with 3. Jason's stomach lurched. He forced his mouth to move. "Us. What's your name?" The figure lifted its head. Jason's heart stopped. It was Jenna, or something that looked like her, but her smile was too wide, her teeth too many. The voice that came out wasn't quite hers. It was softer, stretched like an echo. "You almost forgot me." Jason stepped back. The air around her was wrong, thicker, colder, like the space around her wasn't fully real. Bryce grabbed Jason's arm. "That's not her." Jenna, or the thing wearing her face, tilted its head. The front door, which had slammed behind them, now stood slightly open. A thin voice curled out from the crack, barely a whisper. "Jason!" Jason's blood turned to ice. The real Jenna was still inside. This thing, this copy, had left in her place. The Jenna thing took a slow step forward. "Let's go back in," it whispered. "Just for a second." The air around them tightened. Jason's mind screamed, "Run, do not go back inside." The house wanted them to return. Jason grabbed Bryce and Olivia, yanking them back. The Jenna thing's smile faltered. Its mouth twitched, almost disappointed. Jason didn't wait. He turned and ran. Bryce and Olivia followed, their shoes slamming against pavement. They didn't look back, didn't stop running, not until the house was far behind them, its darkened windows still watching. Not until they reached the car, hands shaking as they fumbled with the doors. Jason slid into the passenger seat, gasping for breath, hands still trembling. Bryce started the engine. The headlights illuminated the road ahead. Jason risked one last glance in the rearview mirror. The front door of the Winchester house was wide open now. A figure stood in the doorway, watching them leave. Its smile never faded. The engine roared to life. They drove away. The house let them go, but Jason knew it had sent something out with them, and somewhere in the dark Jenna was still screaming. Hey guys, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.